When Christians come under attack, they know they're going to be attacked violently and viciously by President Trump. I know it's not a nice thing to say, but that's the way it is.
Good evening. We begin tonight with a breaking development that is unfolding quietly, deliberately, and with consequences that could reach far beyond one nation's borders. At this hour, the United States is preparing a move that senior officials are not yet ready to describe in plain terms, but the implications are already being felt across diplomatic, military, and humanitarian circles. Sources familiar with ongoing security discussions confirm that American forces are being positioned for involvement in Nigeria as violence tied to religious identity intensifies and pressure mounts for decisive international action. This is not the kind of story that announces itself with sirens or speeches. There has been no emergency press conference, no single line confirming troop numbers or timelines. Instead, there are fragments, carefully worded briefings, quiet meetings, and sudden urgency behind closed doors. And sometimes that's how the biggest stories begin. For months, reports from central and northern Nigeria have painted a grim picture. Armed groups moving freely through rural communities, entire villages emptied overnight, clergy abducted, worshippers killed, churches burned to the ground. The violence itself is not new, but what has changed is its intensity, its reach, and the growing consensus among observers that certain communities, particularly Christians, are being targeted with increasing frequency and brutality. Nigeria, Africa's most populous nation and a key regional power, has long struggled with overlapping crises. Terrorist insurgencies in the northeast, criminal banditry in the northwest, communal violence in the Middle Belt, weak security infrastructure across vast rural terrain. But in recent months, attacks on Christian communities have surged in ways that advocacy groups say can no longer be dismissed as collateral or incidental. Tonight, that reality appears to be reshaping U.S. policy. Multiple sources indicate that the U.S. Department of Defense has been reviewing deployment options that would place American troops on Nigerian soil in a support capacity. Official language remains cautious. Phrases like security assistance, advisory missions, and capacity building dominate public statements. But privately, the concern is clear. The situation is deteriorating faster than Nigeria's security forces can respond. The country at the center of this crisis is Nigeria, a nation of more than 200 million people, sharply divided along ethnic, religious, and regional lines. It is a strategic partner of the United States, a linchpin of West African stability, and a nation whose collapse or continued instability would have consequences well beyond its borders. Over the past year, human rights monitors and faith-based organizations have documented a rising pattern of attacks that disproportionately affect Christian populations, especially in rural areas where state presence is minimal. In many of these regions, armed groups arrive at night, surround villages, and execute coordinated assaults. Survivors describe attackers separating residents by religious identity, killing some, abducting others, and torching homes and places of worship before disappearing into the countryside. These are not isolated accounts. They are repeated, consistent, and increasingly difficult for international observers to ignore. For years, Nigerian officials have maintained that the violence gripping the country is not religiously motivated but driven by criminality, terrorism, and competition over land and resources. And it is true that Nigeria's security crisis is complex. Muslims and Christians alike have suffered, but critics argue that acknowledging complexity does not excuse failure, and that the government's inability or unwillingness to protect vulnerable Christian communities has reached a breaking point. That argument has gained traction in Washington. Behind the scenes, lawmakers from both parties have been pressing the administration for answers. Why are attacks continuing with such frequency? Why are perpetrators rarely brought to justice? And at what point does diplomatic engagement give way to more assertive action? Several members of Congress have framed the issue as a test of America's commitment to religious freedom. Others see it through the lens of counterterrorism, warning that unchecked violence is creating ungoverned spaces where extremist ideologies flourish. Still others view Nigeria as simply too important to fail and too dangerous to ignore. In recent weeks, those perspectives have converged. Sources say intelligence assessments delivered to U.S. officials paint a troubling picture. Nigerian security forces are overstretched, under-equipped, and struggling with morale. Response times in rural areas can stretch into hours or days. In some cases, communities report calling for help repeatedly, only to receive no response at all. Armed groups, by contrast, appear increasingly organized, well-armed, and emboldened. This is the context in which the idea of a U.S. troop presence is now being seriously considered. Any deployment, according to officials familiar with the discussions, would likely be limited in scope. Special operations advisors, intelligence and surveillance units, training and logistical support for Nigerian forces. The goal, at least on paper, would be to enhance Nigeria's capacity to protect civilians and disrupt armed groups, not to conduct independent combat operations. But history offers a cautionary note. American military missions abroad rarely remain static. Conditions on the ground change, threats evolve. What begins as advisory support can expand when violence escalates or when local forces fail to gain control. And in regions already suspicious of Western involvement, even a small U.S. footprint can become a lightning rod. Nigerian officials are acutely aware of this. Publicly, the government continues to emphasize sovereignty and national control. Privately, security leaders acknowledge that assistance may be unavoidable. The calculus is brutal: accept foreign support and risk political backlash, or reject it and risk further bloodshed. For Christian communities caught in the middle, that debate feels painfully abstract. In many affected areas, churches no longer ring bells openly. Services are held in secrecy or not at all. Families sleep in shifts, listening for motorcycles or gunfire in the distance. Displacement camps swell as survivors flee villages that may never be rebuilt. Clergy who remain speak of fear and exhaustion, but also of abandonment. International advocacy groups have warned that failure to act now could result in mass displacement on an even larger scale, and possibly atrocities that will later be acknowledged only in hindsight. They argue that early intervention, however imperfect, is preferable to silence followed by regret. Critics of a U.S. deployment counter that military involvement risks oversimplifying a deeply rooted crisis. They warn that foreign troops could inflame tensions, validate extremist propaganda, and entangle the U.S. in a long-running internal conflict with no clear exit. Both sides agree on one point: doing nothing is no longer a neutral choice. Tonight, as discussions continue in Washington and Abuja, the atmosphere is tense but restrained. Officials are choosing their words carefully. No one wants to move faster than the facts allow, but no one wants to be accused later of having seen the warning signs and looked away. We are told that clearer signals may come soon: a formal statement, a confirmation of troop movements, or perhaps a carefully calibrated announcement framed as expanded cooperation rather than deployment. However it is presented, the substance will matter far more than the language. This story is not just about Nigeria. It is about how the United States responds when strategic interests intersect with moral responsibility. It is about whether religious persecution triggers meaningful action or remains confined to reports and resolutions. And it is about the lives of ordinary people whose survival now depends on decisions made thousands of miles away. As this situation develops, we will continue to track every confirmed detail, every official response, and every consequence on the ground. What happens next could redefine U.S. engagement in West Africa and determine whether vulnerable communities receive the protection they have been pleading for. Stay with us, share this report, follow our continuing coverage, and do not look away, because the next chapter of this story is already being written, and its impact may be felt far beyond Nigeria's borders.